Hey everyone, and welcome back. Listen, this might sound like a bit of a dumb question. What is he talking about? But are we actually a republic here in Australia? And maybe we just don't know. Is that possible? Well, hear me out. Most Australians think that we rejected a republic. They think that we're still under the British Crown, or that we're still under the Queen or the King. They think we're a constitutional monarchy. We're part of the Commonwealth, for goodness sakes. Well, you're about to be blown away. So hang on tight, strap yourself in. I'm not presenting some form of wild conspiracy here. I'm just going to present the facts, which you can all check for yourselves. Then by the end of the video, you can answer the question yourself. You should know about this, I believe. You have a right to know. You live here in this country, in Australia, so why shouldn't you know about it? I think it's very important. So in 1999, Prime Minister John Howard, he called for a referendum. And his question was really straightforward. Should Australia become a republic or not? We voted no, okay? End of story, right? We voted no, move on. We must still be under the British Crown. Surely, right? Well, not quite. Here's the question. What if that vote itself was just a decoy? If it wasn't what it seemed? Am I crazy? What if it was already decided and done quietly by 1986? What if the question wasn't about becoming anything, but about maybe recognising something? Let's just rewind history. So when Australia federated in 1901, our constitution began with these words: under the Crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. So that sentence there, that one really matters. And it still does matter, as far as I'm concerned. It meant the authority for all Australian law comes from one place, and that is from the British Crown. Power flowed from there, downward, from the British Crown to the Governor-General, to the Parliament, and then to the people. That was the structure. A monarchy by design. That's what a monarchy is. Now here's where it turns. The first move was in 1973. Gough Whitlam's government introduced an amendment to legislation, and it was an alteration to the Royal Style and Titles Act, considered by many to be a small change, a symbolic change that I believe came with massive consequences. It was the beginning of a 13-year process, but that was only the beginning. It removed reference to the United Kingdom and created a new title, from the Queen of the United Kingdom and Australia to the Queen of Australia. So ask yourself, why remove the United Kingdom if nothing changed? Why would you bother changing the name? What did Queen of Australia actually mean in law? Was it still the same crown, or is it a different crown altogether? Well, maybe in 1973 it wasn't so clear. So this amendment to the Act in 1973 created a new legal identity. The sovereign now acted as Queen of Australia, not as Queen of the UK and Australia. So from that moment, the authority of government no longer flows from Britain. It flows internally. Australia now has its own crown, distinct from the British Crown. It's not the same thing. But was any of this actually explained to the public? There was no referendum, there was no debate, there was no announcement, just a quiet rewording and a quiet redefinition. Now 1986, this is where it gets interesting. This is where the final thread snapped. The Australia Act of 1986 was passed. So what did this act actually do? What it did was it ended the power of the UK Parliament to make Australian laws, completely. Section 1 states really clearly, no act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom shall extend to Australia. That means no more appeals to what was called the Privy Council. That was the British court that once overruled our own High Court. At the moment, there's nothing higher than the High Court. Section 11 says no appeal shall be made to the Queen in Council. So that meant that any Australian who wanted to challenge a government decision in London could no longer do so from 1986. And up until 1986, if our leaders mucked around, Boom, you could go to the Privy Council. Newsflash, that's gone. The last external avenue that we had, really, was completely closed off. So ask yourself, if no British law applies, no British court overrules, and no British minister advises on anything here in this country, then who really governs Australia now? Who holds the Crown's power? If it's no longer the Crown of the United Kingdom, if it's no longer the British Crown, then what is it? The Australia Act also says the monarch acts here only on advice of the Australian ministers. So by its own words, the King, or the Queen back then, acts on Australian advice, not British advice. What power does the King have if he can only act on advice from Australian ministers? So when power no longer flows from London, when laws are self-contained and appeals to any higher authority are now impossible, what does that describe to you? To me, it describes a system that is entirely independent, entirely self-legislating, and internally sovereign. Sounds like a republic, right? I think it does. To me, that sounds like a republic. We might not be called that. But look, nobody said that. There's no way that anyone said that. The words have stayed, but the meaning has changed. We kept the word crown. We still use the word crown, but we think it's connected. It's not the same crown. We kept the Governor General, but under a new authority, not under the same authority. It's under an Australian authority now. It's under the Australian Crown, not under the British Crown. We kept the illusion, but not the origin. Okay, so what happened next? Obviously the symbols stayed. We know that the symbols have stayed, but we know that the meanings have changed. We still have the Governor General. We've still got ourselves a Prime Minister. We still use the word crown. People assume that nothing's changed. Fair enough, you can understand why. But if you look closer, if you dig in, if the British Crown no longer governs here, then what crown are we actually under? I'm sure many of you have heard of the term Crown land. We all have. Most people think that Crown land means land owned by the British Crown, by the Queen or by the King, but it doesn't. Look it up. Under state law today, Crown land is held by the Crown in right of each Australian state. That's not the King of England, it's not the Queen, that's your Premier, that's your ministers, your state ministers, your departments. So every lease, every title, every mining right granted under Australian authority. So when we say Crown today, we're not talking monarchy. If you look at what the law says, what the acts have done, we're talking about bureaucracy. That's how deep this illusion actually goes. The name stayed, the meaning didn't. In law today, every official oath that's taken, every government seal refers to the Crown. But which one? The Crown of Britain, the British Crown, or the Crown created by Australian law from 1973 to 1986? When judges speak of the Crown, they mean Australian or Australia's executive, our ministers, our departments, and officials acting in the King's name, the King now. So is that monarchy or is it self-government using an old label? The Constitution still says the Queen shall, but the Acts of 1986 say Her Majesty acts only on Australian advice. So again, the text hasn't changed in the Constitution, but the power has shifted. Now the King who we have doesn't do anything. In fact, I don't think he can do anything. So what they've done, this is how you change a system silently, quietly, without saying it. So are we even under our 1900 Constitution? You tell me. It seems that the mechanism itself has been quite clearly updated, but the appearance hasn't been. The Crown became local, but the advice became internal. The authority itself is now domestic. within Australia, yet the language is still colonial. Still sounds like it's constitutional. Ask yourself why, and maybe have a look around. Why keep the illusion of British oversight when it no longer actually really exists? Why keep this title if the meaning is gone? Because I'll tell you why. Because symbols calm people down. It preserves some form of continuity. They prevent alarm. If the government was to just one day up and announce, hey guys, congratulations, you're now fully self-contained, fully sovereign, we make our own laws here, we answer to no one, it's obviously going to raise some questions, isn't it? They're going to say, who authorised this? Where was the referendum? Why weren't we told? So instead, they did it by what I'd call administrative evolution. Step by step, act by act, clause by clause, action by action. From 1973 to 1986, a 13-year process. The public saw some form of stability, the lawyers saw transition, and the system saw opportunity. And once complete, it looked the same from the outside. We've got the same Parliament House, haven't we? We've got the same ceremonies that go on. We've got the same national anthem, although that's being changed slowly, I believe. With the same face on the coins, but legally it was transformed. Then came the word Commonwealth, a comforting word, a familiar word that we all know. But what does it actually mean? What does it mean in law today? In 1901, Commonwealth meant the union of states under the British Crown. It represented connection, empire to dominion, dominion to subject. But after 1973 and again after 1986, that connection was dissolved. So where politicians say the Crown or the Commonwealth, they're often referring directly to themselves. Departments of State acting under Australian law in the King's name, but not his direction, not his rule, not his authority. Now consider this. We belong to the Commonwealth of Nations. Have you heard of the Commonwealth of Nations? What is the Commonwealth of Nations? Well, it's a voluntary club, 56 independent nations. Many of them are republics. They don't have a binding constitution, no shared sovereignty, no royal control. The king is head by tradition, not by law. So ask yourself, if the Commonwealth of Nations is full of republics and we're in that club, or what does that say about our own structure? It says independence is the norm and participation requires no monarchy. So when someone says we're under the Crown, what does that mean today? Does the King make laws? No. Does the United Kingdom Parliament rule? No. Do British ministers advise in any way, shape or form? No. Every law originates right here. Every court answers right here. Every appeal ends right here. So when authority stops here, where does monarchy remain? In practice, not in name, maybe only in ritual, maybe only in symbolism. Well, that's the beauty and the deception at the same time of constitutional language. Keep the icon, change the mechanism. To most people, nothing looks different. But to the system itself, everything is different. So by the 1980s, by 1986, the new system was already sealed and you had no say. Britain's role, gone. Authority, internal, power, fully contained here. Yet every Australian had no idea. Why? Because the story was never told. And then came 1999, Johnny Howard calls a national referendum. The question's asked, should Australia become a republic? Simple words, loaded meaning. But stop there for a sec. What were people actually voting on? Were we voting to leave Britain? That already happened. Were we voting to gain independence somehow? Well, we already had it. So what was left? The proposal itself for that referendum said to replace the Queen and Governor-General with a president chosen by Parliament. Not by the people, by the politicians. That's the detail. most people forget today. Australians didn't vote against independence, they voted against political control. They sensed the swap, monarch for minister, one figurehead for another. And they said no. Australians voted pretty clearly. No, we don't want that. I don't think they voted that because they didn't want to be independent or because they loved royalty or tradition, but because they didn't trust the political class. And who's going to blame them? So when headlines said Republic rejected, was that really true? Or was the question never what it actually seemed? Because by then, Britain was well and truly gone. The Crown was localised. The courts were final here in Australia. And the system was complete. So maybe the vote wasn't about change at all, but maybe about exposure. And do you see how clever this actually is? Ask a question that sounds empowering, but it hides the reality. Do you want to become a republic? Translation. Do you want to admit what we actually already are, what we did to you back in 1986? And the answer no locked the illusions in. Perfect symmetry. The paperwork's done. The language is preserved. The public are distracted. Because if people said no, no one would look deeper. No one would ask what already happened. The same symbols remained. We've got the same coins, the Queen on them, same titles. We've got portraits on the walls, all harmless, all very familiar. But underneath, every function of state now operates locally. Parliament made laws. Courts upheld them. Ministers advised the king, all within Australia. So where's the monarchy in practical terms? All it is ceremonial, symbolic and sentimental. All it is theatre, really. It's not governance. And that is the brilliance. Keep the theatre running, keep the crowd calm. Meanwhile, the machinery keeps moving quietly. Ask yourself this, if the acts of Parliament show full separation, why do we still hide it? Because once you name it, you own it. Once people realise that they were never asked, questions follow. Who authorised this? Why no referendum then? Who decided the cut? These questions shake people's confidence. They reveal continuity as a managed illusion. The public narrative says, we are a constitutional monarchy, but the legal reality says all authority is Australian. Both can't be true in practice. So which description matches the facts? Let's go and test it. Does Britain legislate here? We know that that is an absolute no. Does Britain hear appeals? No. Does Britain approve our laws? No. Then by definition, sovereignty rests here. That's not rebellion, that's legal evolution. And it's written in plain English within the acts themselves. Yet most Australians have never read any of them. They rely on experts to interpret it for them. Nothing changed, they say. It's still symbolic. But symbols don't make legislation. Symbols don't sign treaties. Symbols don't command defence forces or issue passports. It's governments who do. And our government does. So what's left of a monarchy behind the name itself? All it is a costume, a signature, a ceremony. Everything else is completely autonomous. And if that's not independence, will you tell me what is? That's the quiet truth hidden behind our anthem, or behind the portrait of the Queen or the King, behind the polite fictions of political language. So when you hear the words, we rejected a republic, pause and ask yourself, rejected what exactly? A system we already had? A structure already operating? Or just the idea of calling it by its real name? That's the power of narrative control. Change the meaning, keep the label, and most will never notice. The paperwork shows it. The Act itself confirms it. You can just Google it and you find it straight away. The courts acknowledge it, but the headlines never did. So here we stand, a nation self-governed, self-legislated, self-contained, still saying that we're under a monarchy, still saying that we're in the Commonwealth, still thinking dependent. Yet every practical measure says otherwise, and that's the final question. If independence looks like this, functions like this, and legislates like this, what else would you call it? So thanks very much for joining today. Make sure you hit like and subscribe, turn on notifications for when I put out new videos, share it around. Let's get this out there, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.